Brixton, South London, 1981. A howl of rage against the police. Britain, like America, has a long history of racial tensions. Last weekend, thousands of people marched in London in solidarity with American protesters. But there are George Floyds here too. The names on the signs are Black Britons who have died after encounters with the police here. In 2011, anger erupted on the streets of the capital after the shooting of Mark Duggan, a 29-year-old who was shot and killed while police tried to arrest him on suspicion of planning an attack and possessing a gun. The disturbances left London burning for several days. It's been 20 years since the Macpherson report examined how police handled the Stephen Lawrence case, a defining moment which exposed institutional racism within a police force. Searing inequality persists. Today, black people are 40 times more likely to be stopped and searched in the UK. More than half of the inmates held in prisons for young people in England and Wales are from a black and minority ethnic background. And amid the rage over George Floyd's death, confirmation that black people are disproportionately at risk from coronavirus. George Floyd. Protesters here and in America say no one should be in any doubt. Inequality and racism is a matter of life or death. Well, to discuss all these issues and more, joining me now is the comedian Dane Baptiste, the author of Think Like a White Man, Nels Abbey, and the Labour MP for Streatham, Belle Ribeiro Addy. Belle Ribeiro Addy first. The systemic racism has been really laid bare in America. Why do you think, after so many decades of protests, it hasn't been addressed?
I think because there hasn't simply been a willingness to address it. It suits those that benefit from it to continue, and that's why we have those situations in the US and actually over here. That there has been no really huge kind of schemes and ways forward to address these issues. We thought we had it here with the Macpherson inquiry, but we saw it quite easily rolled back by a next government and years of austerity. So it's about having staying power in those particular mechanisms that are put forward, but also a willingness of the state to address their issues. Mm-hmm. And people simply don't want to address the fact that they are behaving in a racist way.
We'll come back to how it might be addressed now. But Dane Baptiste, I wanted to ask you, do you share that really sort of visceral anger that we're seeing on the streets of America? Do you share that now?
I absolutely do. I've learned over years and maturity to be able to rationalise the anger and find a way of directing it in a productive fashion. So to say, I can take that energy and in my particular unique example, I'll put it into my material. So normally I think what you tend to find with black people are outspoken about their anger, their rage, their angst, and their fear about living and trying to thrive under an oppressive system. People normally reduce that and say they're overthinking it, or they have a chip on their shoulder. So myself personally, I enjoy having a chocolate chip, and I show it all the time, and I'm happy to articulate it and remind people exactly why I am angry. So I completely identify with it, and I can't see why anybody who prides themselves in living within a free democratic society would watch the very people that we pay to protect us as civilians kill, maim, and brutalise us and not become enraged.
Well, Nels Abbey, let me pick up on what Dane was saying there about the fear. Do you fear that what happened to George Floyd could happen here tomorrow, today, next week?
Oh, no doubt whatsoever. It's a very, very clear and obvious reality. It's not that what could happen has happened in the past. It happened subject to what the courts may say about it. So arguably, as the perspective is held within our community, amongst other places, it's happened many, many different times. It happened in 2011 with Mark Duggan, in which he was killed, then killed again in the media, and then eventually pretty much was accepted that he was killed justifiably. But it led to the burn down of our society, because it led to essentially the breakdown of trust in those who should be keeping us safe, and trust in the state's ability to tell us the truth when we expect them to.
Well, Belle Ribeiro Addy, you started to touch on this in your first answer. So how can this be tackled now? The fact that black people are more likely to die in police custody, they're more likely to die of COVID, more likely to be unemployed after COVID, all of those inequalities, that racism too, how can that be addressed, do you think?
Well, first we need to look at the issue openly and honestly, and we need to stop having a situation where, we address an issue when it comes to black people. We list, a whole list of issues that usually verge on, being in lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Everybody wrings their hands and says that's very sad, and then we just go on, wash, rinse and repeat. It's simply not on, and it's not changing anything. When these reviews and reports and inquiries are done, the thing that we need to be doing is talking to the community, working with them to implement the measures that have actually been put down, and actually putting resources behind it. A lot of the time, so many good kind of measures are put forward in terms of what we should be doing to change things, but there's no resources put behind it. And if you're not willing to put resources behind something, you clearly don't care about it. It's important that, as you touched on, that we have a proper inquiry into why so many BAME people have died from COVID-19, very, very disproportionately. It's quite insulting that it's been put down to our genetics when you can see that in Africa and the Caribbean and Asia, where those genetics are shared, people aren't dying. BAME people are not dying at the same rate. So it's very clear that there's an issue here, that there's a systemic issue. But because we are not willing to address it, things are not changing. And even when these figures come out, there's no instant lurch from the government to think we need to do this, we need to shield certain people. It's just, let's just carry on as normal, and maybe we'll deal with it later.
Nels,
I just think...
Let me bring in Nels Abbey there. How do you stop that cycle, that endless repetition? What's your view?
So how do we stop? It's a very simple question to ask. How do we stop centuries, essentially, of systematic racism in which we've debased people and actually made them synonymous with being everything that's bad about society? It is immensely difficult. But I often think that we might be revolving around what I describe as the 4 Ps. One is portrayal. Another is money, pound sterling. Another is actually the pertinence or the prominence of people within society, and the other one is what I'll describe as the, oh goodness gracious, my form is letting me down right now. But the other one, let's just say, it's actually how people are actually the prominence of the actual significance of people within society. To repeat that, I let myself down a little bit there, but I do feel that, look, across the board within our society, there has to be what we have is a systematic issue. And this is going to take a systematic purging, a systematic restructuring to make sure that this systematic issue is resolved once and for all. And it's going to take a root and branch, a real review and beyond the review, actually almost just tearing the root and branches off and actually getting to the root and getting back to things properly. I think it's going to take a lot, but I think that it's something that's very, very possible with the right willpower. I think us as a society, one thing that we really need to do is stop shying away from talking about these things, because the last thing we want is for us to have to talk about these things when things go fantastically wrong. That for us to actually, we should find it a lot easier. There's nothing to be embarrassed about, nothing to be bad about, but it's something that we just have to recognize, that systematic racism, systematic white supremacy is something that is really, that our society is clutched by at the moment.
Dame Baptiste, let me ask you, we're talking about it now, but are we weighed down by history? Is it just almost impossible to overturn centuries of that sort of historical legacy, whether it's slavery or... I just wonder what your view is.
I mean, I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's our position after creating a framework on a global scale of institutional and structural oppression for that to be changed in the space of 2 generations. Because I think there's always the idea that we recall oppression is really weird sepia tone flashbacks where we think where slavery ended, everybody integrated the next day. And, the reality is that after slavery, black people, the diaspora deal with redlining, gerrymandering, be it vote, nation laws. Like in America, lynching only became a federal crime last year. So I think something can be done, but we're not just talking about racial rhetoric and the things people say when they have certain platforms or racist politicians. We're talking about an entire system from which an entire capitalist system has benefited. So
Jane,
the process of
frustrating. I'm really sorry to interrupt you. The line is really bad, so it's really frustrating, and I really want to hear what you've got to say. Let me just go to Belle, see if we can fix the technology there. Joe Biden talked about George Floyd's death being a wake-up call. Do you think it will end up being that, or have we been here before?
We've been here many times before, in the US and in the UK, and as much as it may have sparked something, and it definitely has, it's not the end. I don't believe it's necessarily the last we'll see of this until, you know, we see a willingness from our governments and from those leaders to take a stand, to take things seriously. I mean, we've got Donald Trump in the US and we've got Boris Johnson here. Both of them are perfectly happy to pander to anti-immigrant or racist rhetoric in order to attempt to win elections. They're perfectly happy to do that. And if we have leaders and if we have, you know, a political class that continues to do things like that, there will be no change, because you see no leadership from the top and you see no willingness to put things in place that prevent discrimination. We can't stop what people think in their heads, but we can definitely stop every single emanation of the state from behaving in a certain way to people just because of the colour of their skin.